portion of our third party.
So Sabrina, can you follow up so we can have our health discussion soon?
So there was a slide up there that just went off for some reason, and I was going to talk to that for just a second, but I want to introduce KGOA and Pauline Mingram. They are library operations specialists and have been working with the project in terms of advising the design and also making some feelers into the library partners that are out there and that do provide these services in the East Bay region. If I can get that, I'll get KG and Pauline to start speaking with you, but I'll try and get that slide back up, because one of the main ideas at ECCL is that library is really a whole facility idea. It's not just a space within a set of facilities. And I want KG and Pauline to, as they talk to you a little bit about that, to have the image up. We tried to highlight all the various spaces and places within ECCL that have library function as part of their program.
Okay. Because of your timing, I'll go ahead and I'm KGOA and my partner is Pauline Mingram, and we have been working with the community groups, with some of the staff groups over the last 3 years. I've actually been first as a volunteer maybe 5 years ago, commenting before you even had your election, but congratulations on that. School and public libraries as a joint facility and joint operations are not an entirely new concept, but there are not a lot of them around, so it's a little bit unique. And this ECCL is a very exciting opportunity, and I applaud you for the whole concept of the whole campus, but also the opportunity to have a school library and a public library. The district has had a school library and is very capable of running a school library for K through 12. But the concept of joining this and using the facility with the public library would be new to Emeryville, and it would be, again, an excellent way to maximize the use of the facility. And that's one of the, I think, the really key things. And you have a shared vision that came out of the community meetings and out of the election itself that said, we want to do this. As you know, the city already has a contract, and for many years, with the City of Oakland to provide library services that have been principally at the Golden Gate Branch Library, but also gives you access to libraries throughout Oakland and actually throughout the whole county. We visited 7 joint school and public libraries that were in, 2 of them are in Oakland, and several are in Sacramento, and a couple in Southern California. And based on the size of the population of Emeryville, it is our recommendation that you do look for a partner to run the public library portion of it and work with the district librarian. And that's because there's really a great advantage to be in a partnership with one of your neighboring libraries, because it gives you an excess of purchasing power. It also brings you economies of scale on a lot of different fields. The real benefit is that you get access to much larger collections. And you share the technology, both the back-of-house technology and also the public technology. And that's really the heart and soul of what modern libraries are about. The one thing that really works well with this particular concept and with the design is that most libraries are always looking for, the one thing we've heard many times, can we have a cafe? We want to, we want to be Starbucks or Pete's or something, and we have our coffee while we're reading or using library facilities. Well, in this case, there is a space for a cafe. The other thing you're always looking for is meeting rooms, because you need little study rooms, and you need, or a computer lab, a learning lab. Again, the school needs that. The library can share that, do some of the instruction in the non-school hours. Some of the other areas are the proximity to the teen lounge and the senior lounge. All of those are things that might be in a public library, but in this case are shared in your whole campus. So all of those things are really very different than a lot of the other joint school and public library settings that we've seen, and really make it a superior project. We've been working with the architects and the school librarian and other members of both the school and city staff to develop a facility and a design, at least a preliminary design of facility that is flexible enough and open enough to operate both as a school library and as a public library. So the point where we have had some preliminary meetings, very preliminary, with some of your neighboring larger libraries. Oakland, where you have a contractor, the city has a contract already, with the city of Berkeley, and with Alameda County. And we've talked to them just to find out if they were interested in it. Would they want to be a partner? And I will tell you, they were a little bit, I'm not going to say reluctant, but it was a kind of a new thought to them. But as we talked a little bit more, they got really excited about what Emeryville was doing. And so all three of them are interested and have been in, again, very basic early discussions on what this would constitute, what kinds of services would be available. So that's the point, that's where we are at now. And as Roy pointed out, we would like to move forward with determining a selection process for a partner and work with the staff on perhaps a draft RFP and bring it back to you to make sure that the elements that you are interested in are incorporated into that RFP, and then move forward so that next year we will be able to put an RFP together. You can select a partner, and that they would be on board in time to do all the prep work that is going to be necessary so that the library can open when the campus is complete. So that's the part we're at now, and any questions you might have, we'd be glad to try to answer them.
You said Berkeley and Oakland. What was the third partner?
Alameda County.
Alameda County.
Yes. Alameda County operates about 11 libraries. The one you might be most familiar with is Albany.
Albany.
Yeah.
That's very gratifying that they're interested in this concept, and I hope we can move forward with a dialogue. You're moving in the right direction.
Thank you.
You mentioned that there is one shared library in Oakland.
There actually, well, there's one formal one. That's the 81st Avenue Library. That's actually on a campus with two elementary schools. And then the second one is the Cesar Chavez Library, operated by the City of Oakland. It is not formally associated with a charter school academy, but it's in the same building. And so they really do operate as a school public library, but it's run by the public library.
Okay, so the one on 81st, then I'm assuming it's partnered with OPL, not with the county. It's with Oakland Public Library?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
It's a branch of the Oakland Public Library.
Okay. And I have a couple more questions. I'm wondering if we can look at those models and understand how many non-school staff it takes.
Yes,
in order
exactly.
to operate that, in order to have some sense of the cost. I understand that this is the first phase of doing this project, and I do appreciate the detail. Of course, when I look at the spreadsheets, I'm wondering what is the dollar sign, the last column that goes here. And so I'm looking forward to finding out more about that. And this library, I'd also, I think, like to understand, because our position is a little bit unique. I mean, we're just down the street from another library, and while we may have Oakland might be interested in thinking about this new addition as another branch. We also give them a substantial amount of money every year, and I'm wondering what will happen there, because when you look at what you've put together, you can see that a lot of our residents use that branch. It's very important to them. So I'm just wondering if if we bring in the county, I don't think there's necessarily going to be a kind of cost shifting from one to the other, but we may be looking at actually paying two entities, and that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, I do know that when in our preliminary discussions with Oakland, they are considering all of those things. I mean, that's part of their interest, is how this may affect the Golden Gate Branch Library and your current contract. But your current contract is year to year, and so you don't have any future obligations if you choose not to. So anyway, that's just what you have at this point.
The other question is, there's been questions about whether or not Emeryville can afford the cost. There's been some rather tough negotiations around what is paid for that library. So I think but I think this is actually an opportunity. So I would encourage us to move to having an RFP to answer exactly these questions, rather than speculating about what may or may not happen. If we put an RFP together to ask these questions, to ask, what access, what reciprocal use agreements there are in terms of if a library takes operation of this, what other benefits does it bring? What's the staffing? I think Councilmember Asher has brought up some very good points, which could all be addressed in an RFP, and rather than guessing at what it might be, let's call the question. And I think there's been enough preliminary, I really appreciate really years of groundwork that has been done on this.
Right.
Now we've got the foundation built, let's start on the house. And let's ask what's it going to, what is it going to cost us? What are the benefits for the residents? And then we can assess that. If we assess that, I believe you mentioned spring for a time frame of getting results back from an RFP. If we can get RFP results back in spring, that's plenty of time for whoever we select to have plenty of say into, how we furnish and operate. I would also ask that the RFP address the question of, are they going to operate the cafe, or do we need a separate operator for a cafe, or is that going to be a school program? So I think if you could bring back to us a draft RFP, I think we can all try to bake our questions into it, and then let's get it answered from people who are actually saying what the cost will be.
Right.
Well,
Just for
John,
background information, all three of the libraries, the county, Oakland, and Berkeley, all belong to the same cooperative here in the East Bay. It also includes Contra Costa County. So in terms of reciprocal services, whichever one you're partnered with brings you all of those services shared in a shared way. Now, whether or not they want to duplicate it within a 3-block radius is, again, decisions that they would need to make. But in terms of the reciprocal services, borrowing from any of those libraries, it's all in the same database, and it makes Emeryville eligible for receiving those services.
So I'm going to interrupt this proceeding to note that we're coming on our 2-hour
Move to
time frame.
continue the agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Do we have?
How long? 15, 20, 30 minutes? Or until we finish?
Until we
Bake
finish this
till
item?
done.
Bake
We
till
only
done?
have 2 more.
Finish this, then we have a 5-minute update.
That's right.
Chair, I'm going to have to leave.
Okay.
I just, without-
Any objections to that motion?
school operations in Oakland, that'd be very helpful. if
Yes,
we-
actually, we do have those
Great,
already.
great, very good.
I have a question about in this report. It's maybe I'm drilling down to too much detail at this point, but there was a list of other spaces that, in the report, that says that could be used for library functions, and it includes the community plaza and the welcome center. And I guess my question is, I don't get it. That's my question. I don't get how a plaza could be used for a library function.
Well, it's actually a terrific area. A lot of libraries like an outdoor space, and our weather is, pretty good half the year anyway to use that. But when you have, somebody just mentioned a posada or festa or something, you're doing that, it's a lot better to do it outside than inside. There's also other kinds of events. I mean, we've done storytelling both outside. We've done evening story times in pajamas. Anyway, there's other kinds of activities that could happen outside of the walls of the library. But the computer lab is one that's very important. Tutoring and study areas, for instance, part of the cafe could be used for those kinds of things. Libraries both have to be quiet and noisy. I mean, so you have to be able to separate that out, and using some of the other spaces within the ECCL really makes that easier, actually, than in a confined
Do we want to
space.
include food, a food space, a cafe with that?
Well, the cafe is adjacent to the library. So the cafe is here, and the library is here, and they really have, both share space, but, and their tables and so on. We've operated libraries with cafes in them. Both, sometimes a friends operate it, sometimes it's a totally different vendor. I mean, we haven't discussed any of those things, but they can coexist with libraries, and actually are an often requested service of libraries because of Starbucks and pizza.
Well,
I mean,
along those lines, I mean, I had the same question in the cafe. I understand. I plan to get my book from the library and drink coffee in that cafe. I can't wait till it opens and bring my laptop. But the teen center game room, I mean, that's 1,000 square feet in the estimate. How is that part of a library?
Right. That's also from a librarian's point of view. That was one of the most exciting things that we heard from the city and city staff, and that is in some of the libraries we visited, the teens, the pre-teens, the tweens, or whatever they're called. Anyway, that's one of the greatest areas of perhaps potential conflict because of the noise and because of desire to play some games and to be a little bit more active. And so the idea that we've talked about with the city staff is that more of the active teen participants can be in the lounge, and the more academic or studious or tutoring or school-based things can be in the library proper. We've also discussed the idea of purchasing materials that can be placed in the lounge so that, again, you're making use of the space, but you're also using the library's expertise in building collections, in multimedia collections, as well as print.
If I might continue, I had a question about, on page 7, you had service population, if I'm reading this right, estimated for 2030. It makes sense to look to the future, but the numbers seem to be basically our current numbers, 10,000 citizens and 20% of our current daytime workforce population. So if I'm reading that right, 15,000 people, that's about where we're at now. Is that, I thought we're likely to grow into the future, or are we just saying we're not going to be any bigger in the workday or the resident population?
No, the projections are for 15,000.
Residents,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I mean,
2030
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
one of the
So
projections
do
that
we need
we
to project more?
when you're pouring concrete or you're building things that are fixed, it's always hard to project how much space you need for bookshelves and for computers and so on. But one of the things that we have incorporated into that is that you have a finite geographical space, but there is probably going to be growth. And so technology, again, helps us in the sense that the equipment for technology is getting smaller, and the resources are becoming more prevalent online. So we kind of built in some growth for what you need now, but also what we project will happen as more and more things become in e-formats and so on. So that's part of it. But we can use this in that part of the report. We didn't actually write that part, but we used some of the projections that the city provided us.
Maybe somewhat related question, and going back to the Golden Gate branch, is it anticipated at all that we would continue that relationship in some respect with the Golden Gate branch, and you know, have both places, or we'd save money and end the Golden Gate contract and just have our own library, or is that all part of the RFP discussion process?
That's a great thing to put in the RFP. I would like to point out that the City of Oakland's master plan for libraries points out that this area has a deficit of library services, even with the Golden Gate branch. The Golden Gate branch, they tried to get money to expand it. They weren't able to get it. So they were already looking at Golden Gate not serving the needs of this community. And we're looking at this community growing in population, so the needs are increasing.
And they closed it, they shortened the hours. They didn't shorten the hours, they changed the hours.
They've shifted the hours, but there's still issues there.
Yeah,
And there's been issues about how much money they need from Emeryville. I would ask that if we're going to do an RFP, to see if we could do an RFP for a multi-year agreement, maybe like a 5-year agreement, so we have some sense of a longer-term relationship. But I think your issue is a very good one, and I would not. I've valued the Golden Gate Library for years. I wouldn't want that to be damaged, but at the same time, I want, as you've said, there's an economy of scale that Emeryville doesn't have. And if we want the best services for our kids, having an alliance with a much larger library with greater resources gives our kids the state-of-the-art resources and gives it to the community in a place where the City of Oakland's own plan has said it's underserved anyway. So I think we need to find a
So
way to put that
Oakland can
into the
pay
RFP.
us to serve their residents instead of the other way around.
We can call it a draw.
Moving along.
Well, yeah. Okay, well, I think Member West is next, but I had one more comment, was just that I have had the ongoing question of how do you combine the collection for an adult population and the collection for children and teen population, and I appreciate the detail in the report that sort of lays that. I don't know if those numbers are right or correct or the best, but I have a more concrete understanding of how you would do that, and I appreciated that.
Just to your point, I
Yeah.
think, again, in the RFP, we can ask if they have neighboring library services like Oakland, how might Oakland might have
More
the
of
Golden
one
Gate
than the
be
other.
more adult and
Yeah.
ours be more kids. So I think there's ways
Complementary.
to make it more complementary, but to the degree you can bring that out or ask those questions.
Member West.
Thank you. I just had I saw in the report what would be an ideal square footage, or what would be adequate, I suppose, is maybe better, and I just wanted to confirm that the plans, Roy, maybe you could answer this, what the square footage is for the cafe and the library as it stands right now?
Actually, either Mark or KG may know that number off the top of their head better than I. It's in the 5,000.
Yeah, the library itself's 4,400.
I think it's 5,000, 5,500 square feet, something like that.
Okay, so your analysis matched what is in the drawings. It wasn't separate from.
Right.
You made it all fit, in other words, within the architect's drawings.
Yes.
Okay. And then my second question is about kind of security of materials. I mean, we have the sense of checking things out of the library, and when you kind of blow the idea of library out and put it all over ECCL, how does that work? You know, a teen center, you know, certain materials you mentioned might be there, and how do you, I'm still stuck in my, like, maybe old 20th century notion of library, so I'm trying to understand, again, about materials.
Right. In the library itself proper, there are security gates, so whether you have a barcode or an RFID tag, so it signals it whenever anybody walks through that gate. We probably have to do something separately from those materials that are in the teen lounge, but they can also be, it's like they could be checked out to the lounge, not necessarily to a person, and if the person wants to borrow something, they would need to come to, you know, individually and tag it to an individual borrower. So we're really looking at, a lot of libraries do that. They put what we call deposit collections in community centers and so on. And I'm not going to say they treat them as ephemeral, but they're not as well secured with these gates and all that, which is an expense. So.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, I just learned actually yesterday of, I don't know if it's a branch, maybe you would know more, of the Alameda County library system, but it's within the Ashland Youth Center in unincorporated Alameda County. I actually met a person who works there, and I need to find out more, but I'm curious how they kind of have a satellite. I don't think it's a full-on branch, but they have a person and some kind of library services through their youth center, and that might be
Right. For the county, there's a couple of unincorporated areas. Ashland and Cherryland are two of the ones they've really been focusing on. And now that they've actually are going ahead with the rebuilding of the San Lorenzo Library, it's really going to help in that area. But those two areas just have been totally underserved. And so they, you know, short of building a whole new facility, a lot of libraries look for that and can put, you know, satellite smaller operations in an existing facility. What's great about the Emeryville plan, of course, is that we'll all be here together, so that's again another benefit. But that's what I believe the county is doing. They have, there's jail libraries too, you know. I mean, that's another example.
So that's a model that I haven't been familiar with, but I think, you know, this is kind of more enhanced than that, but obviously a little less than opening a full-on Golden Gate branch kind of library. So it's good to see the spectrum, and maybe if there was further information about a jail library or you know, one of these satellite branches within another center, that would be good information. Thanks for your presentation and thorough response.
Another quick question. Just, you know, I spend a lot of time, well, not a lot of time, but quite a bit of time at the San Leandro Library. How comparable would this library in Emeryville be to that library?
Well, it's quite a bit smaller.
A lot smaller?
I mean, I believe the San Leandro Library is about 50,000 square feet, or 45 to 50.
Okay.
And this is 4,400, you know. But you're smaller than San Leandro.
And I just want to say, as San Leandro, what's amazing is how it is a community center, and how it, the hours, I mean, it's open every evening, I believe, and I think all weekends, and meetings are held there, and I find it a phenomenal model and different from any other libraries that I've been familiar with. And so whatever could be incorporated from that within a certain budget and space, you know, limitations, I think that's the heart, I think, of the ECCL idea of having a library. Yeah.
Right. We were encouraged with the superintendent's work with the Gates Foundation and this new initiative. You know, the Gates Foundation is a generous donor to public libraries, and I've worked personally with them for maybe now 20 years. And one of the things that they've recognized is that libraries are the community a facility that does the things you've described, meeting room space, cafe space, everyone from infants all the way through seniors. And so, again, that's the great opportunity, and that's partly what the Gates Foundation is really interested in, is other models for education. I mean, so education in a broader sense, which is what ECCL is all about.
In terms of the cafe, very briefly, my children attend a K-8 school where the middle school students have the chance to be young entrepreneurs and run a cafe every morning for the parents who are dropping their kids off. Anyone's welcome. But, you know, they spent the first month of school getting that together. I think it reopened actually this week. And I don't think it's a moneymaker, but it is a chance for the students to really understand what goes into operating a cafe, and you know, on a very small scale. This is for a half an hour in the morning kind of thing, but just thought.
You know, Castlemont High School in Oakland had operated the coffee shop at the Oakland Airport for many years, and it's one of their success stories.
Member Simon?
Can I ask if it's appropriate to have a motion at this time to ask staff to proceed with an RFP draft to come back to us for review?
So it's listed as an information item, and so I think
Do we
need to
have,
put it
do we
on
have
as a-
consensus that that's the direction we'd like? I just want to make sure that we're all on one page, that we'd like the RFP to proceed to draft so that we can review it.
Yeah, I can support that direction, Member Simon.
I don't hear anybody objecting. Move along.
All right. We have direction.
If there are no more comments from the committee, ask if there's any public comment on this item. All right, seeing none, we're on to our last information. Oh no, we're on joint occupancy agreement timeline.
This one is really quick. This is just a chance to make sure that you and the public know that the joint occupancy agreement is still proceeding forward. The city and district attorneys are working on language to iron out the last of the details that we're still discussing, and it's headed toward you all have had study sessions and joint study sessions and chances to meet on your own. It's headed toward the City Council considering approval on November 5th, and then it's headed toward the school board considering approval on November 13th. So staff is looking forward to those approval discussions. That's the extent of that item.
Okay.
Thanks, Roy.
Any public comment on that item? Seeing none, the last item is task force report.
So for this one, again, I'm just going to do a quick context setting bit here and then introduce the presenter. Brief recap. This idea about creating a task force to look at a full-service community and a master plan of that in terms of an array of city and school district facilities that support that was a major discussion at city schools through most of 2012, actually. The resolution, we looked at various iterations of the resolution between June and December of 2012. And the task force members were chosen by this committee, or appointed by this committee, and then they started meeting in late April of 2013. So at the very outset of those meetings, the MIG and MK Think, the consultants who have been helping to run those task force proceedings, set out a number of meetings and an agenda for those different sessions. They described 6 sessions, and 5 of those have already been conducted. Late this year, the task force will be wrapping up its recommendations for the Annie Yates and Rec Center sites. The a representative from MIG is here this evening, and she'll tell you a little bit more about an additional session that's been calendared. The school district looks at this process as part of its planning for development and impacts on its various facilities, especially in light of the ECCL project. It's really important for the district to understand the future uses of its facilities. So as a planning set of documents, it's being funded by the Measure J work. And as the task force wraps up its work, the city manager and the superintendent will be talking with the city schools co-chairs about how and when to agendize the bringing back of that information. But city schools will be seeing that information at future meetings. So with that as background, Diana Sherman is with MIG, one of the consultants that's helping to accomplish this work, and she'll give you a little briefing on how the task force is doing.
Thank you. So we are here tonight. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of an illustration here in just a moment of the process. And I think, as Roy mentioned, we are most of the way through the process at this point, although I think we are at arguably the most critical part of it. So we were asked, in collaboration with MK Think, who is leading this effort, to facilitate a process and basically run a set of 6 task force meetings to really open up, hopefully you can read that, graphics are the most important piece, to run a process to essentially take a look at what the needs were for a full-service community that were not being addressed by the programs either already planned for one of the school sites that is moving forward, so that includes things like this site, or that are anticipated to be met by the ECCL when it opens. And so the notion was that there would be these 2 sites that the uses of which are moving over to ECCL when it opens. So it's the Annie 8 site and the Rec Center site. And they will be vacated, essentially. So what are the appropriate uses moving forward for them? So what we were tasked with doing was working with MK Think to really pull together all of the resources that we've looked at across the years in terms of the planning for the ECCL, the planning for the general plan, the planning for the Park and Rec plan, all the different cycles that we've gone through of really looking at the needs of the community and also weighing that against the needs of the community moving forward, because we do know that Emeryville will be growing, and look at where the gaps are. And working with a task force, a couple of you are task force members here tonight, but we've got council representatives, school board representatives, and a number of community residents. And so working with that group, really honing in on which pieces of those needs they felt were most crucial to address on these 2 campuses that will be available, essentially. And then moving forward, MK Think, who is looking at the physical planning aspect of this, is really examining, based on the buildings that are there now and based on what might be done with those sites, using or not using those buildings, how can these sites, the 2 sites, best accommodate what the task force prioritized programmatically. So where we are, you'll see we've done the first meeting, really setting the establishment of the task force itself. Second, looking at community needs and planning context. Then we brought a number of program possibilities, and we worked with the group to really brainstorm what people could think of. We looked at models that people liked in other areas. We looked at what were the things that people were either unsure of whether they would be addressed adequately at ECCL or felt there might still be additional needs for, or areas that we knew for sure were not going to be addressed at all. And asked for some prioritization of those. What of those were really the most critical? And we know that from the preliminary perspective, the 3 areas that were really identified, one of them was green space, open space, park space of some variety. One of them was arts, with the understanding that there still is a plan floating for the Arts Center, and not knowing if that will come to fruition yet or not. And then the last one is really looking at the needs for the adult population between the ages of 18 and 55, 60 as they move into the senior center. That there was really not a facility or a set of programs designed explicitly for that, although there are some programs at the ECCL that will peripherally pick up that group after school hours. So those were the programs that they identified as highest priority. What we have proposed doing and has been added to this agenda, or to this program essentially, is a community open house, because I think we heard from the task force, and I know MIG feels strongly about this as well, but it's really important to make sure that there's a check-in from the task force with the community to make sure. We know that a lot of these needs are things that surfaced in surveys and surfaced in past reports, but are they still accurate? Is the task force direction the direction that the community would like to see these sites go in? And that's particularly, I think, important for the Triangle neighborhood, because obviously Annie Yates in particular is right at the heart of that neighborhood. And the rec center as well is a contributing piece of that neighborhood, as well as part of the San Pablo corridor. So really engaging with the community. So we are going to be holding a community open house on October 19th, and you will hopefully be hearing a whole lot more about it. So please do.
Do you have a
look at-
time
Yes,
or
10
place?
o'clock, 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. to noon at Annie Yates in the multipurpose room. And that will be in an e-newsletter, and we have flyers that will be distributed. So hopefully you will be getting multiple points of contact with it. And please do, again, get the word out to others that this is an opportunity to really take a look at what the task force has done to date, and to see the preliminary recommendations. And I think it's important to be clear that although we're calling this a master plan for a full-service community, these are recommendations that are going to come first to you, and then they're going to go to the school board and to the city council, because those are the decision-making bodies at the end of the day. So what we're looking for and what the group has been tasked with providing are really their best recommendations based on looking at all the data, looking at what the community has to say about it, and looking at the sites themselves in terms of what they might accommodate. And that can obviously change when it gets to the school board or the council, and that's the prerogative of those bodies to really take action, because those sites obviously are each owned by the two entities. So, any questions?
I have a question. If I may. Was Ralph Hawley site originally included in this?
It was not in what we
Test
were
house.
tasked with doing, because it was already programmed at the time that this process launched in April, I think, and it was already programmed with a prenatal, pre-K programming at that point.
It was a separate process for this site years ago.
I just thought there were 3 sites for some reason when we started this process.
No, it was originally, it was referred to as the 6-site master plan initially, but it was always scoped to look at those 2 sites. And we changed
Yeah.
the wording to make sure that was clear that we weren't
I have
actually looking at all 6.
a few comments on the task force. I attended 2 recent meetings, and I've talked to several members of the task force, and I was a little dismayed to find out from them that they were as confused as I was about the direction of the task force, about the rationale for the task force, and let me expand on this. We went out to this community with this grand vision of the ECCL, as the ECCL would be the center of the community. Now, even before we knock down the high school, the plans are to go out to the community on October 19th and talk about different areas for different programmatic areas. What are we doing here? The ECCL is a marvelous, marvelous vision, and we have had so far, I would say, the majority support to move forward for this. But now we got a wild card in here. We're starting to have a discussion about other places that we're going to have services or programs. This doesn't make sense to me. I understand that this was, from my perspective, kind of a knee-jerk reaction to some criticism of the school board that they had no plans for Annie Yates or Ralph Hawley or
That's
something
not
like that.
exactly true.
Well,
I can
if I
speak
may
to-
finish, you can have that after I'm finished. I could be wrong about that, but I'm concerned that the message that the city school committee is sending out, the council is sending out, and the school board is sending out that, oh no, ECCL is not going to be the center of the community. We're going to have sites all over in a 1 square mile town. There's something inconsistent about this message, and I want everybody to think carefully about going out on October 19th with a widely publicized meeting that says these are other areas, and we have to decide now, or we're going to give recommendations now for how they will be used. It doesn't make sense to me, guys, and that's why I asked to have this put on this agenda.
So I'd like to set the context and the in terms of the impetus for this task force a little bit differently. When we lost the idea of using the AC Transit Yard. When we lost the idea of buying the PG&E site, when we decided to go with land that we didn't have to acquire, we had to work within certain space constraints. Then as the money for that project cut out buildings and stories on the campus, we realized we could not house all of the programs that we would like to deliver on the ECCL campus. So when we looked at what the public entities in town had access to, these were the two sites where we could think about housing programs that could not be housed on ECCL campus because of the space and constraints. So in keeping with the ECCL vision, not everything can be that we would like to offer in this town can be offered on that site, and a lot of compromises and changes had to happen in terms of to accommodate what could be built there with the available funding. So that combined with a lot of public attachment, quite frankly, not to the portables on San Pablo that the rec center uses, because you can't get that loyal to portables that are depreciating every day. But there was a lot of loyalty to a neighborhood-based Anna Gates, and so the question is what can we offer the community, particularly on that site where that could meet unmet community needs. So because the ECCL site can't house everything that we want, we can house projects that can be wraparound services elsewhere in the city. So that was the impetus for the task force. It wasn't, and there was a lot of, there was a lot of concern about what would happen on that site and all the other sites in the city, and it only made sense to think about our 1 square mile holistically, rather than just we couldn't put all of our eggs in one basket on the ECCL site. So that was the background for that.
Well, that's your perception of it, Ruth. My perception of it is that we went out to this community and we told this community that this was going to be a center for community life. The programs would be concentrated there, and now we've come to a point in time where we don't have any steel in the ground yet, any building in the ground yet. We don't even have the old high school knocked down. We clearly have to go out for another school bond, and to me, it is not the time to go out to the community and say, oh, by the way, we sold you a bill of goods on the ECCL. We really can't do what we said we were going to do there. There's something inherently, the timing on this is not good in terms of the school bond if you're coming up. What the message it sends is
The parcel tax, yeah.
a parcel tax.
We don't need another.
No, the parcel tax. I misspoke
Well,
there.
I thought,
But do you see the point I'm trying to make here? This is a matter of the community. So far, the majority of the people are supporting us on ECCL. I think to go out to the community now and say, oh, by the way, it's really not going to work the way we said. We want to spend some more money or do something different here.
well, I thought Anna Yates, what we were going to try to do with Anna Yates was bring another education provider into that site and see if there was a need. But that need was not a need that was going to be filled by this city per se. We were going to talk to the City College of Berkeley and see if they wanted to have some sort of educational outreach at that site. And that was the only thing I remember about that site. And then secondly, going back to the rec center site on San Pablo, I thought there were some commitments years ago about using that for parking for the senior center.
No,
So, now, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've been hearing.
Kurt,
If I can.
wait a minute, the other issue with the rec center, that was built with housing money, redevelopment housing money, and I don't know where we are in the process here of with the state trying to claw everything back. and we have to have a way of
Yeah.
getting rid of property, why this task force is even discussing the recreation site, for the life of me, I don't.
So let's
I
go
think
back
we're
to the
way
beginning.
off.
Let's go back to how this started, and let's be clear about what we decided because this was a decision of all 10 of us. So when we brought this to the 10 of us originally to authorize the consultant to begin this work, the idea was we don't have enough room. We cut the ECCL vision was cut down by 1/4. We also don't intend, it was cut to 1/4 of its original size. We also do not intend to sell that site. And there was many rumors that could possibly happen. Those are malicious and untrue rumors that have no basis in fact. And we've said for years that we intend to bring in, as Kurt said, educational partners and other partners for programs like the Art Center, which I don't know if it has a home now post-redevelopment or not. We've talked about Alameda County having teacher center. We've talked about recreation space. We've talked about many different uses for the community for that space. We've talked about it as park space. We've talked about it as, space for other community activities. As Member Brinkman has said, we've talked about it not in terms of programs that the city has to pay for, but as we've done with the YMCA here, as we've done with other partners, to be able to trade space for programs. We're a very small town. We're a very small town, and we can't afford lots of big programs that other cities have. But what the school district has is some terrific, well-located facilities where we can trade programs for space. So, but building those partnerships, as we found out with the library, we've been talking with the library folks, we have 5 years of groundwork going in just to get to the point where we can get a good response to an RFP. So the idea was, let's go to the community, let's have a discussion about what are the kinds of uses, and let's give the school board some direction, because it's the school board's property. Let's give the school board some direction as to what types of uses, what types of partnerships we need to be building. And to take the community's direction as what are the services, what are the partnerships to power both student and community recreation success. So when we brought that to the committee liked that idea. The committee also asked, this committee asked to include the rec center. Let's get ideas on the rec center too. Quite frankly, I agree with you. I like the idea. I'm a big advocate of affordable housing. We could have some family housing there. I'd love to see it, and I don't see it in the task force, and I'm a little sad about that. But all of this was to advise us, to advise the school board as to what partnerships we should be building, because now's a good time to talk. When we have a building started, when we're setting that up, anything that we can't fit there, we're still doing what we told the community we're doing. We're still building a city-school partnership that links together all the services for our kids.
I think it may also be helpful, Nora, one of the things we asked the task force to do at their very first meeting was to brainstorm some guiding principles, and a couple that stuck out to me that I think address some of your very concerns are, we did hear loud, and we had a lengthy discussion about this too, whether or not we should duplicate services. And one of the eventual guiding principles was that wherever possible, the new program should not be duplicating what's at the ECCL. And there were people on both sides of that who felt that some of the ECCL programs, we might want more of them, and we could do some of them at those other sites. But that was one priority. And another are some of the pieces that are unique about those sites are, for instance, to the extent to which some areas of the NE8 site can provide green space for the Triangle neighborhood. That's not something that physically can be provided at the ECCL simply by virtue of location. And so that is a central part of that neighborhood. And so that's another piece. And one of the things that MK Think found in their analysis is that there are also carrying costs of these properties. So even if all we do is board them up when everything moves over to ECCL and leave them there, you're going to be incurring cost to maintain them over that time.
Right.
And so I think the idea was to begin the planning process and begin the thinking process to really figure out where those gaps were, whether or not these properties can even address them, and if so, how. Begin that in such a way and at such a point that they are not necessarily going to sit vacant but accruing costs for some number of years before those programs and any new uses can go into play.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's not an either or. Either we have a center for community life at ECCL, or we're diffuse and we don't have a center for community. I mean, ECCL, I think, by virtue of even the third-party contracts that we talked about tonight, particularly the library, I think, will function as a center and attract people in the fields and the teen center and the health clinic, and it will function as a center. What we're talking about here is what else can we provide for the community? What else can we do in partnership that are non-duplicative services that aren't going to cost us the job training, the community college, the teacher training, what can we do? And I think the last thing we want to make sure we avoid is having the site vacant and unused. And so by August 2015, we need to know what we're doing with that site and have it have the partnerships built and the plans in place.
And the other piece I think to remember is that this is part of a comprehensive plan eventually that is going to present the community as a whole in 4 of those sites. It's not just the ECCL that are the other sites already. It's already the senior center, the 2 sites that are serving the 0 to 5 population. So there are already pieces of that full service community that are not being served on the ECCL site physically, but that are just as instrumental a piece of that comprehensive, the notion of having a wraparound 0 to beyond community that is really supporting throughout those ages. Those are not all housed on a single site. So.
I guess
I understand the dilemma that you have with the Anna Yates property. There has to be some forward movement on that. But I am concerned about addressing the recreation center property. I think we should do a research on that to see whether or not we even have the ability to do that under the strictures of the Department of Finance. With our long-term property management, there is something here that strikes me that we may be going down the wrong road. So before we go out to the public and start talking about the Anna Yates thing is one issue. That's
a clear
one issue.
sense of.
But the recreation center, I think before we move forward talking to the community about that, we better pull back. Now,
Get some resolution on.
I may be
commitments.
not remembering clearly, but I thought at one of your task force meetings that I went to, you had some discussion there about the senior center.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was not part of the original intent, and I don't believe the city had said anything.
Yeah, it was not to make any changes to the senior center. The 2 discussions that I can recall that touched on the senior center, one of them was Cindy actually speaking a bit. There were some questions from task force members about how adequately the needs of seniors were being served by the senior center facility and whether there was a need to provide additional services for that population. And that was, I want to say, at our second or third or fourth meeting, maybe, when we were looking at program possibilities. And Cindy provided some great insight on what types of uses were adequately accommodated on the site and what uses the site was not able to accommodate for that group. The second piece was one task force member who did raise the issue of parking on the rec center site in relation to the senior center and whether or not that was an appropriate use of that site. It would be really, I think, helpful to find out if there are any commitments from the legal perspective to that use. The task force was not supportive of putting a parking lot on San Pablo. So,
Well, all I'm suggesting is before you go out to the community with a broad you know, a broad invitational to people on October 19th that we take a hard look at that rec center property. We don't make promises. The city doesn't make promises that it can't
That's a very
fulfill.
good point, and I think it would be
And
great
the
to follow
school
up with
board
some more
has a
information
pretty
on
good track
any
record on that, too.
commitments to
We
that
want to
property
be
already
careful
has.
we don't overpromise what we can do. ECCL is a big deal. Well, Ruth, you know, you say you're not promising anything, but in a sense, when you say to people, do you want to park? Everybody wants to park. Of course you want to park. How you pay for it's a different thing. So can
That
we
is part of the
regroup
scope.
and take a look at this task force and how and when you go out to the community?
Okay,
And
And
if I hear,
keep in mind the parcel tax.
and if I hear Member Davis right, I think she's talking all about perception. She doesn't want to
Exactly.
put a perception out there
Right.
to the community that may or may not happen. And I can understand that. And the fact that we promised the community something in ECCL through Measure J, and that hasn't started its fruition yet. And if I'm hearing her correctly, visibly, right.
That's what you hear. That you got it right on, Miguel.
Right. So, but on the same token, I hear staff saying that, these recommendations from the task force will be compiled together, and they will wait until they publicize them to the public based on all these other factors that we're talking about tonight. So, and from the school perspective, the school needs to have a master facility plan. We do not have that. We still have some excess bond capabilities that, in the future we will be able to spend. So from the school board perspective, it is prudent for us to look at all our sites and have a future plan. And I take it that this is what this task force is doing from the district perspective.
Can I just add one thing? I've also had people say, why don't you sell the NE8 site and start retiring your debt a little bit earlier? So I know that's probably something that most people here in this room don't want to hear, but that is a thought process that people are applying to that site, so.
And I have to say, it would be counter to every conversation we've had on the school board to even
I know that,
begin
Joshua,
to
but I'm
consider.
just saying that there's a
So,
lot of thoughts
The
out there.
amount of money we could get from selling the site would be peanuts compared to the community benefit we can get from those sites. So, but I do think the point is well taken about timing, and I think when we originally set the time frame for the task force, the idea was that we'd be under construction by now.
Exactly.
And
Perception,
things-
perception,
And things
perception.
have shifted. However, so I would ask if the city could send out information about whether or not that site is allowed to be used for the uses that we're talking about, or can it, if it was bought with housing money, maybe it can only be used for housing, and the committee needs to know that.
Exactly.
If
Exactly.
that's the
That would be really
case,
We dropped
then
the ball of that earlier.
if that's the case, the October 19th meeting really should be put off so that the committee can be informed of that change and take that into
At least
account.
put it off till after you knock the damn schools down.
Well, I think timing
Jeez.
a community meeting to the time that we're knocking it down is a good idea. But I would like to put that in staff's hands to look at how to align all of that, to make the adjustments since the schedule was originally put together.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like the timing doesn't mesh right now.
Yeah, and we need the parcel tax. We need it.
Member West?
Can I just add that, I agree with what I've heard here tonight, and I feel that, I understand that it takes a long time to set up partnerships, but based on a recommendation and one community group, the school board's not going to be making a decision about what's going to be opening in September of 2015 on that site within the next month or two.
No.
Right,
I would
right.
hope. And so you don't want to be premature and give the perception that this is what's going to be there and then things will change. So I'm curious if there is a timeline for the school board to follow. I feel like the city isn't necessarily going to be bound to that same timeline, and I want to be clear that we're not necessarily following the same timeline, and that if you need to build a framework for partnerships, it behooves us to explore many different partnerships and not just the one that at this point seems most likely. It sounds like we need, because there is time that goes by, and to see what needs are not being met. The three that rose to the highest priority was green space, arts, and serving the adult population, 18 up to seniors. And based on Ruth's comments earlier saying that ECCL just cannot contain all of the programs that were originally intended, I see that in some ways. We thought of a bigger site with more green space, a performance space perhaps, and if that's what is coming out. But I'm not entirely sure, or I'm not convinced, I guess, that the task force has been considering, but since you sit on it, maybe you can confirm the same perspective that as you expressed this evening.
They have all different perspectives on that
and
task force.
so I'm just a little.
They're a bunch of individuals.
Yeah. So it's a recommendation, but obviously, and it carries some weight, but it's not going to be the deciding factor. And it's important, I think, again, to manage perception, I think, as Miguel said, because timing is not ideal.
To answer your question, I mean, I think we're talking about a matter of, a month or so of timing. I'm concerned that from the school standpoint, we have to make it clear that we don't have any unused facilities.
That's correct.
So I think
No, I understand
that is paramount. So I wouldn't want us going, into the first quarter of next year without a facility. We need a facility plan for what we're going to do with our facilities for many, many reasons. Not the least of which is planning, but there's, it's
And that's hinging
too
on
late to
this.
get into a long diatribe on what we can do. But I'm fine with staff going back, and, if we have to shift it a month, I would love this, it would be great if this open house could also be a celebration and a description of what are the programs going into ECCL, and, talking about where we are with the library, and where we are with the clinic, and where we are with the arts programs.
That would be much better, because then you get some balance, and if you have it, after you have a clear sight on the high school, the perception is going to be a lot different. And your focus, hopefully on the task force, would now be Anna Yates entirely.
That's right. That's right. No, I think that's,
I think it makes a cleaner way to go.
I very much,
But if we can confirm that.
I very much appreciate you bringing this to the,
Well,
to the meeting.
it was kind of a shocker to me going to those meetings, I'll tell you.
So does staff have enough direction? And I'm looking at both Roy and...
Sounds like we're pushing the meeting, which is good because we were due to send it out to the newsletters. So we'll make sure it doesn't go out, pushing it. And do you know the date yet for when the demolition of high school is?
We'll talk.
Not quite.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say meeting, the meeting...
The community meeting, but it
we're
probably
talking
will
about
also
both
affect the
meetings.
task force meeting. Because
Yeah.
it does
Right.
not make sense for the task force to
Right.
reconvene until the community meeting is
And
happening.
are we
I
going to
think
have
that's
a
right.
grand celebration when they implode the
You better have
school?
one hell of
Yeah.
a party.
Yeah, I mean, a press release and pictures. Yes, yes,
You
yes.
get a river rock
Tear down that
for your
school.
garden.
Are
Everyone
we
in
going to do a
community.
fundraiser, selling rocks? A certified rock from...
Okay. Member Brinkman has
Yes,
a serious question.
Betsy Cooley ran out of here to go home, and she gathered the information on Measure A parcel tax, and it runs through July 1st, 2019, and it's 19 right here.
Yeah, no, 17.
There's some issue around that.
Yeah, we verified
We
that.
we
Is it
figured
good?
out it's 17.
Okay, then that's, we need to talk to Betsy.
There's wrong information out there.
Yeah, there were,
All right.
to her point, though, there were two public documents, and
Wait
that
another
came out.
second. Okay.
And the one that is correct has been validated by Lou Edwards, and it is the 17,
Okay.
2017.
So whatever's on the web needs to be corrected, whatever's out there.
Okay, we've had a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Motion and second.
And a second, all right. Hearing no objections, we're adjourned.